The Fade skin is one of the most popular knife skins in the game. It looks incredible on pretty much every knife and is a huge fan favorite. That being said, I wanted to make a video that showcases every Fade knife currently in the game and their current price as of the time of this recording. Hopefully you enjoy it. The Kukri Fade is one of the newer skins added into the game, considering the Kukri knife itself was only added with the Kilowatt case months ago. It does look pretty solid, but I do think the animation is pretty similar to the Huntsman or Gut knife as far as the spin goes. The Fade does look great, but honestly there aren't very many knives that don't look amazing with this skin on it. The Kukri does have a bit of an inflated price since it's newer, but currently you can get a factory new one for about $850 on Steam, while minimal wear costs about $860. The cheapest price I can find publicly was about $600 for a factory new version on CS Float. The Nomad knife is definitely one of the more underrated knives in the game. It has a clean animation, and especially with the Fade, the blade looks great. This is pattern number 41 at 100% Fade, but even the lower patterns still look amazing with the knife. These are also pretty pricey, mainly cause the Fade is so in demand. However, you can get yourself a factory new version on CS Float for about $840 as of the time of this recording. I also am a big fan of the rare inspect animation on this knife. The Paracord knife is one that I really don't see too often in game. The animation is relatively simple, and since it's one of the newer knives, it hasn't reached a lot of the OG players the same way the other knives do. That being said, I think the Fade is absolutely gorgeous on this knife, especially with the Paracord handle. It really helps the pattern pop. Thankfully, since this knife isn't as popular as the others, the price is relatively reasonable. A factory new version costs about $550 on the team market, while minimal wear is a bit more expensive since it's more rare to drop. On CS Float, the cheapest price is about $370 respectively. The Fade Survival Knife is definitely a great looking knife. I think especially at 100% Fade, the hook and design of the blade really helps the skin pop. I also think while the base animation isn't the greatest, the rare inspect animation is pretty sweet. This got added to the game with the fracture case and can also be found in the shattered web case. The price on these isn't too insane, and I think it might be the best bargain as far as Fade knives go. A factory new version on Steam goes for about $500, while minimal wear is currently sitting just under $1,000. On CS Float, the cheapest factory new version is about $330 for comparison. The skeleton knife is definitely one of my personal favorite of the new knives. The rare animations are absolute incredible, and the blade shape lends itself well to a lot of patterns, especially the Fade. The Fade skeleton is definitely great looking, that much is obvious, and ever since it was added to the game with the fracture case, it has been pretty in demand. Because of this knife's popularity, it's one of the more expensive of the new knives, with the lowest price on CS Float for a factory new version being $1,275. It does look incredible though. Classic knives are a skin that gets a lot of hate in CS2, and I am really not sure why. I think the blade is incredible looking and the animations are some of the coolest in my opinion. I will say I am grateful this knife gets a lot of crap because it keeps prices relatively low. This was added with the 20th anniversary case, and currently when looking at CS Float, the cheapest factory new version of the skin is listed for $540. I think this knife looks great and wish it got some more love. The Talon knife Fade, also known as the Karambit's little brother, is a great knife skin and pattern that really looks incredible. Obviously, this knife is meant to compete with the Karambit, but thankfully the prices on these is a lot easier to stomach than its more expensive cousin. The Fade on the Talon is pretty sick because you really don't get too much yellow in the pattern, and overall it is great looking. This was added with the Horizon case and can also be found in Danger Zone cases. The price on these currently on CS Float is around $1,100 for a factory new version. If you ever want to switch up the vibe and feel like a 1950s greaser, the Stiletto knife is probably for you. This is a unique knife compared to a lot of the other options, and I think the Fade is one of the best patterns available for this weapon. Almost all Fade patterns end up looking great on the small blade, and the animations are clean in my opinion. This knife was originally added in the Horizon case, and currently on CS Float, the cheapest factory new version costs about $750 as of today. I do think the Stiletto is a great knife and worth picking up. The Ursus knife is a pretty clean option toward the cheaper end of the knife spectrum. It's a clean blade with a really cool rare animation. The fade really does look amazing, especially with the squared off box cutter type blade the Ursus has. These were also added with the Horizon case like a lot of the newer knives, but this one is definitely one of the cheapest options that still looks good. The Ursus Fade on CS Float, as of today, can be had in factory new condition for about $450. Compared to what you'd have to shell out for a Bayonet, that's a pretty good deal. The Navaja knife has become the gut knife of the newer knives added to the game. It does have a cult following, but for the most part it's pretty forgettable. The animation leaves a lot to be desired, but I still say that the fade does look great on this due to the smaller blade. Something about this knife reminds me of being on a fishing trip just like the gut knife. It was added to the game with the Horizon case and is one of the cheapest fade knife options out there, if not the cheapest. On CS Float as of today, you can get a factory new version for about $200. The Bowie knife is back for a vengeance from down under, and the fade pattern is turning heads everywhere. Jokes aside, I do think the Bowie knife has a cool animation, and ever since Valve changed the look to feature both gloves, I've enjoyed it a bit more. For how large this blade is, the fade pattern actually does a good job of covering the majority of the blade and giving it a good look. This skin was added into the game with the Wildfire case, and on CS Float today you can get a factory new version for about $370. The Falchion knife was added to the game back in 2016 with the addition of the Falchion case, and the fade is one of the better patterns that exist for it. I love the way the Falchion is designed because it really forces Valve to adjust things to make it unique. The one thing I wish I could change about this skin is that the fade pattern went all the way down the handle, but I know some people love the silver look down there. The price on these isn't too insane and tends to be pretty close to the price of Bowie knives. On CS Float today, a Falchion fade can be yours for just $328. Shadow daggers are definitely underrated considering they are one of the cheapest knives in the game. Ever since they patched the bug where your crosshair would glitch when you used them, these have stayed under the radar. The animation is pretty clean, and they are a very unique knife. The fade does look great on this knife, and the purple really does work well with the centerpiece being a solid color. I love that they went with a pinkish color for the base instead of silver like the Falchion. These were added with the Shadow case, and currently on CS Float a factory new version goes for about $215. The butterfly knife itself is an absolute classic. Most CS players admit this knife has the best animations in the game. What makes this knife even better is the fade skin. I think it looks absolutely beautiful on most maps and really helps the animations look even better. The one downside to this skin is that getting a purple tip is exceedingly rare, and most of them end up with more of a pink to yellow fade instead of all three colors. The other downside is the price, but we all know butterfly knives get expensive. Currently on CS Float, the cheapest factory new fade is going for just under $3,000. The Huntsman was added to the game in the Huntsman weapon case and has remained a relatively good option for a cheaper knife. I personally do enjoy the animation, but I do think that a lot of the community doesn't love it. That being said, the fade pattern really does look great on this knife, but you need to make sure you get a high percentage fade for it to look its best. The prices on these aren't horrible. On CS Float today, you can get one with a decent fade for around $400. The Bayonet Fade is an incredibly classic knife in CS. It's always been a fan favorite and is one of the few knives I think even my own mother could identify. The animation is simple but enjoyable, and the fade patterns tend to be pretty generous on this knife. That being said, the super low fade percentages can look garbage, so be sure you're getting a solid fade if you're buying one. This was added way back in the day with the original CSGO weapon case, and currently on CS Float you can get a factory new one for about $700. The Flip Knife Fade is yet another absolute classic from Counter-Strike. The animation is simple but incredibly clean, and the Fang style blade makes just about every high-end knife finish look great. The Fade is especially good looking, and I think there is a reason it has remained popular throughout its lifetime. This was added in the OG weapon case, and currently a factory new one on CS Float costs about $600. It is a bit more expensive than the lower tier knives, but still is a respectable piece of any inventory. The gut knife, in my honest opinion, gets way too much hate for how cool it is. Especially the fade version looks great, has a great animation, and the price won't make you need to sell a kidney to Gabe. The handle is not the best match for the fade pattern, but it still does look pretty great all things considered. This was also added way back in the original weapon case, and has never really gotten the recognition it deserves. The cost on these on CS Float is amazing because they cost under $200 for a decent fade percentage, and you can get a factory new one with a good fade percentage for $203 as of today. The Karambit Fade is definitely one of the best looking fade knives in my opinion, solidly in my top 5. The way the fade pattern gets applied to this knife looks great to me, and if it wasn't for the fact that almost all of them had destroyed corners, I think I would have one myself. The thing you have to worry about with these is not so much the fade percentage, while that still matters, but the float instead. Anything without some of the lowest floats will have scratched corners in game, even in factory new. These are another one of the original knives, and you can get a factory new one for about $2,300. The M9 Bayonet Fade is another one of those knives that just screams Counter-Strike. It was one of the very first knives added into the game with the original weapon case, and ever since it has enjoyed a huge amount of popularity. They certainly aren't cheap, but they look incredible, and the animation is one of the best in the game. On CS Float currently, a factory new version can be had for around $1,800 with a solid fade percentage. Those are all of the fade knives currently in the game. If you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate you pressing the like button and subscribing. We post videos like this often and are trying to eventually catalog every skin in the game.